Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Plateau. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1908, a pivotal moment for the Ozark Plateau. President Theodore Roosevelt had just established the Ozark National Forest by proclamation, preserving nearly 1 million acres across Arkansas. The region was celebrated for its rolling hills, limestone caverns, and crystal-clear springs that had drawn visitors seeking natural healing since the mid-1800s. The Boston Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks piercing the sky at over 2 years' feet. Amid this breathtaking terrain, where mist clung to the valleys and sunlight filtered through dense hardwood forests, sat the Stillwater Health Resort, a stately building perched on the edge of a limestone bluff overlooking a tributary of the White River. The resort had been constructed in the autumn of 1902 by Dr. Mortimer Harllo, a man whose reputation in medical circles was as impressive as it was controversial. Standing 6 feet tall with a rigid posture that never seemed to relax, Harllo had trained at prestigious institutions both in America and abroad. His establishment promised more than mere rest. It offered complete restoration to those suffering from what was delicately termed nervous exhaustion. The advertisements that circulated in papers as far as St. Louis and Chicago spoke of scientific rejuvenation, modern treatments, and permanent relief from the afflictions of modern life. Wealthy patrons from across the Midwest arrived by train to the nearest station, then traveled the final 10 miles by carriage up winding mountain roads to reach the isolated retreat. What made the Stillwater different from the dozens of other health spas scattered throughout the region was Harllo's claim to scientific legitimacy. Unlike establishments that relied primarily on mineral waters and fresh air, the doctor incorporated emerging European treatments, hydrotherapy, electrotherapy, and what he mysteriously referred to as neurological recalibration. His background lent credibility to these approaches. Before establishing the Stillwater, Harllo had published several papers in medical journals on the treatment of nervous disorders, though colleagues noted his theories often pushed beyond conventional boundaries. The modern mind, he wrote in an 1899 article, labors under the burden of excessive stimulation. Our industrial age assaults the senses and taxes the nervous system beyond its natural capacity. The resulting disturbances, anxiety, melancholia, hysteria, represent not physiological failures, but adaptations to an unnatural environment. The physician's duty is to intervene at the level of neural function, restoring calm through scientific means. The main building of the Stillwater Health Resort was a massive Victorian structure of red brick and white limestone, designed in the Kirkbride style that had become popular for institutions of healing. Its central administrative section rose 3 stories, with symmetrical wings extending outward on either side. Staggered to ensure each patient room received abundant natural light, a feature Dr. Ada Harllo insisted was essential to recovery. The design had been modified from traditional asylum architecture, replacing the institutional appearance with ornate facades and decorative ironwork that gave it the appearance of a grand hotel rather than a place of treatment. Unlike state institutions that housed hundreds of patients in increasingly crowded conditions, the Stillwater accepted no more than 40 guests at a time, ensuring personalized care and absolute discretion. The resort's grounds were equally impressive, 20 acres of landscaped gardens featuring winding paths, meditation benches positioned to capture scenic vistas, and a series of small pavilions where patients could rest while taking the air. A natural spring had been channeled into an ornamental pool, its waters subsequently flowing into a series of graduated baths in the hydrotherapy wing. According to promotional materials preserved in regional archives, these waters possessed unique mineral properties that synergize with electrical treatments to accelerate neural recovery. The isolation of the still water was not incidental but central to Harllo's therapeutic approach. Separation from the environment that precipitated the nervous decline, he explained in letters to prospective patients, is the essential first step toward recovery. Only when removed from familiar surroundings and habitual stimuli can the mind truly begin to reset its patterns. This philosophy justified the resort's remote location and strict policies regarding outside communication. Patients were permitted to send and receive correspondence only once weekly, and visitors were limited to monthly appointments scheduled at the doctor's discretion. For the wealthy families who committed their troubled members to Harllo's care, these restrictions seemed reasonable, even necessary. The early 1900s had witnessed growing public acknowledgement of what was then called neurasthenia, a catch-all diagnosis for conditions ranging from anxiety and depression to more severe psychiatric states. The fast pace of modern life, the pressures of business and social obligation, the noise and congestion of growing cities, all were blamed for a perceived epidemic of nervous disorders, particularly among the upper classes who could afford to worry about such ailments. The Stillwater's clientele reflected this demographic reality. Its patient records, partially recovered during later investigations, read like a catalog of privilege. Industrialists suffering from exhaustion following business reversals, society women diagnosed with nervous disposition, heirs and heiresses afflicted with moral lassitude or inappropriate emotional attachments. Some had been committed by concerned family members, while others sought treatment voluntarily, drawn by the resort's reputation for discretion and effectiveness. According to surviving accounts from former staff members, daily life at the Stillwater followed a regimented schedule designed to re-establish natural rhythms. Patients rose at dawn for light calisthenics, followed by a prescribed breakfast. Mornings were devoted to individualized treatments, hydrotherapy for some, electrical stimulation for others, and, for nearly all, private consultations with Dr. Harllo himself. Afternoons allowed for supervised recreation, walks on the grounds, music appreciation, or art therapy. Evenings concluded with an early dinner and communal rest periods in the main hall, where Harllo would sometimes deliver lectures on nervous health before patients retired to their rooms by 9 o'clock. The first sign that something was amiss came in March of 1908, when a telegram arrived at the sheriff's office in the county seat. The message was brief, sent by a man named Ambrose Whitlock, who claimed his sister Josephine had been held against her will at the Stillwater for over a year. The telegram, preserved in county archives, read simply, "Sister Josephine detained Stillwater Resort against wishes. Stop letters. Show distress. Stop request official investigation. Stop." The sheriff, a pragmatic man named Vernon Hadley, initially dismissed the concern. The Stillwater was, after all, a respected establishment catering to the wealthy and influential. Harllo had made substantial contributions to local infrastructure and was regarded as a community benefactor. Sheriff Hadley's initial notation on the telegram, "Another family dispute over treatment," reflected his skepticism. Nevertheless, duty compelled him to make the journey to investigate the complaint. The journey to the Stillwater was not an easy one, particularly in early spring when melting snow and seasonal rains turned the mountain roads to mud. Sheriff Hadley's journal, donated to the County Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1957, describes a 4-hour journey by horseback, the last hour spent following an increasingly narrow trail that wound upward through dense forest before suddenly opening to reveal the resort standing like a castle upon the bluff, its windows catching the afternoon light. According to the sheriff's report, preserved in county archives and rediscovered during a courthouse renovation in 1952, his reception at the Stillwater was cordial if not warm. Dr. Harllo personally greeted him at the entrance, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit of charcoal gray. The physician was tall and lean, with penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate and assess with clinical precision. His silver hair was immaculately styled, and his closely trimmed beard gave him an air of distinguished authority. Hadley noted in his report that the doctor spoke with a slight accent he couldn't quite place, perhaps European, though the doctor claimed to have been educated at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. "I understand you've received concerns about one of our patients," Dr. Harllo said as he led the sheriff into an opulent office lined with medical texts and certificates. Such concerns, while understandable from family members who miss their loved ones, are quite common during the rehabilitation process. Miss Whitlock is making remarkable progress, but recovery from nervous conditions requires time and isolation from the stressors that precipitated her decline. The doctor then presented a thick file containing Josephine Whitlock's admission papers, signed by her brother 6 months earlier, along with detailed treatment notes documenting a progression from acute anxiety with paranoid features to emerging stability with occasional regression. Sheriff Hadley, unfamiliar with medical terminology and impressed by the apparent thoroughness of the documentation, noted that everything seemed in order from a legal perspective. Still, he requested to speak with Miss Whitlock directly, a request the doctor seemed to anticipate. With a practiced smile, Harllo summoned an attendant, a broad-shouldered man introduced only as Mr. Ingram, and instructed him to bring Miss Whitlock to the solarium for a brief conversation. While they waited, Dr. Harllo offered the sheriff a tour of the facilities. The sheriff's report described immaculate corridors with polished hardwood floors and walls painted in soothing shades of pale green and blue. The air carried the scent of carbolic acid, masked somewhat by lavender and lemon. Patients, or guests, as the doctor insisted on calling them, were observed engaged in various therapeutic activities, reading in the library, walking in the gardens under staff supervision, or resting in sunrooms where large windows admitted streams of light. None appeared distressed, though Sheriff Hadley noted most seemed subdued and did not meet his gaze when introduced. The hydrotherapy rooms particularly impressed the sheriff. Here, patients reclined in porcelain tubs of graduated temperatures, some with mechanical agitators that created gentle currents. The combination of mineral-rich waters and precisely controlled temperatures, Dr. Harllo explained, has remarkable effects on the nervous system, particularly when followed by mild electrical stimulation. The electrical therapy room, however, remained locked, the doctor explaining that treatments were in progress and could not be interrupted. When finally presented with Miss Josephine Whitlock, the sheriff found himself facing a woman of about 35, dressed in a high-necked gown of pale blue. Her hair was arranged simply but neatly, and at first glance she appeared perfectly well. Yet something in her demeanor struck Sheriff Hadley as peculiar. Her movements were measured, almost mechanical, and though she smiled and spoke coherently, her responses seemed rehearsed, lacking spontaneity. "I am quite content here, Sheriff," she assured him, her voice soft and modulated. "My brother worries unnecessarily. Dr. Harllo has been most attentive to my condition, and I feel improvement daily. Please assure Ambrose that I will return home when the doctor deems me sufficiently recovered." Throughout the interview, Dr. Harllo remained present, occasionally nodding approvingly at Miss Whitlock's responses. When the sheriff asked to speak with her privately, the doctor intervened with practiced smoothness. "I'm afraid that would be detrimental to Miss Whitlock's progress," he explained. "Unaccompanied conversations with individuals from outside our therapeutic community can trigger regression. Surely you wouldn't want to impede her recovery." The sheriff noted in his report that Miss Whitlock showed no reaction to this exchange, neither disappointment at being denied a private conversation nor relief at the doctor's intervention. Her expression remained pleasantly neutral, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When asked directly if she wished to leave the Stillwater, she replied with the same measured tone, I trust Dr. Harlo's judgment regarding my readiness. The treatments have been most effective. Sheriff Hadley left the Stillwater that day without further action. His report concluded that while the establishment was unusual, it appeared to be providing appropriate care, and Miss Whitlock showed no obvious signs of mistreatment. The matter might have ended there, forgotten among countless similar cases of family disagreements over mental health treatment, had it not been for what occurred 3 weeks later. Ambrose Whitlock, unsatisfied with the sheriff's assessment, traveled to the Stillwater himself, arriving unannounced on a rainy April morning. According to a statement he would later give to authorities, he was denied entry by the staff, who insisted that visitors were permitted only by prior arrangement and with Dr. Harlo's approval. When he refused to leave without seeing his sister, an altercation ensued, resulting in Mr. Whitlock being forcibly removed from the property by 2 male attendants. What distinguished Ambrose Whitlock from many family members in similar situations was his persistence and, crucially, his resources. A successful merchant with connections in several states, he had both the means and determination to pursue the matter through official channels. In a sworn affidavit filed with the circuit court, Whitlock presented evidence that contradicted the documentation shown to Sheriff Hadley. The admission papers bearing his signature, he testified, had been altered. The original document had authorized a 4-week rest cure for nervous exhaustion, not the indefinite commitment Dr. Harllo had presented. More compelling were the letters Whitlock produced, correspondence from his sister during her first 2 months at the Stillwater, before communications had suddenly ceased. The early letters described conventional treatments, rest, dietary regimens, therapeutic baths. But the tone changed markedly in later correspondence. "The doctor has begun new treatments," one letter stated. "Something with electricity. My thoughts feel strange afterward, disconnected. I told him I wished to discontinue, but he insists they are necessary for my recovery." The final letter, dated 3 weeks after her admission, was particularly disturbing. "Ambrose, I must leave this place. Something is wrong here. Patients disappear from the upper floors and never return. I hear sounds at night from the lower levels, not screams exactly, but something worse, a kind of empty moaning. Dr. H. watches me strangely now, says I'm resistant to therapeutic calming. Please come soon." Determined to secure his sister's release, Whitlock sought legal counsel in Springfield, Missouri. The attorney he engaged, Harrison Pruitt, had developed something of a reputation for challenging involuntary commitments. Pruitt began investigating the Stillwater, discovering that, despite its elegant appearance and selective clientele, the resort had never been properly licensed as a medical facility. It operated in a legal gray area, neither a hospital nor a simple hotel, allowing Dr. Harllo to practice without the oversight required of formal institutions. More disturbing were the financial arrangements Pruitt uncovered. Patients at the Stillwater typically arrived with substantial assets, which were placed under the doctor's management for safekeeping during treatment. Family members who inquired about finances were provided with detailed accountings of therapeutic expenses that often depleted these resources over time. In several cases, patients who had entered the resort wealthy had been declared incompetent, with Dr. Harllo appointed as their legal guardian. Through discreet inquiries, Pruitt located 2 former staff members willing to provide sworn statements about practices at the Stillwater. A kitchen worker named Mabel Ransom described overhearing conversations about patients being moved to the quiet rooms when they became difficult. A groundskeeper, Wesley Porter, reported being instructed to construct what appeared to be restraint devices disguised as therapeutic equipment. Both had left the Stillwater's employment within months, disturbed by what they had witnessed, but afraid to speak out against such an influential figure as Dr. Harllo. Armed with affidavits from family members of other patients and documentation of questionable financial transactions, Attorney Pruitt secured a court order permitting a formal inspection of the still water and assessment of all patients by an independent physician. When Sheriff Hadley returned to the resort on May 17, 1908, accompanied by Dr. Elias Thornton, a respected neurologist from St. Louis, and 2 deputies, they found the gates locked and the property apparently deserted. The silence that greeted them was absolute. No smoke rose from the chimneys despite the morning chill. No figures moved behind the windows. The gardens, which had been meticulously maintained during the sheriff's previous visit, showed signs of neglect, with weeds beginning to encroach on the gravel paths. After receiving no response to repeated knocks, Sheriff Hadley invoked the court order to force entry through a side door. The interior of the Stillwater presented an unsettling tableau. The reception areas and public spaces remained immaculate, as though prepared for visitors who never arrived. In the dining room, tables were set with fine china and silver, water glasses filled, napkins folded, a meal seemingly interrupted just before it began. Yet the kitchen beyond stood cold and empty, with no food in preparation. The administrative office, where Sheriff Hadley had met with Dr. Harllo, appeared untouched at first glance. The same medical texts lined the shelves, the same certificates hung on the walls. But the desk drawers stood empty, and the filing cabinets contained only blank forms and obsolete correspondence. No patient records remained, nothing to document who had been treated at the facility or what procedures had been performed. More disconcerting was what the search party discovered as they ventured deeper into the building, moving from the public areas into the patient wings. The rooms on the upper floors, those shown to visitors and housing patients who were regularly seen by family members, were comfortable and well-appointed, consistent with the resort's reputation for luxury. But as the search party descended to the lower levels, the character of the spaces changed dramatically. The basement level, ostensibly used for hydrotherapy and other medical treatments, contained a series of small windowless rooms secured with heavy locks. Unlike the bright, airy spaces above, these chambers featured iron bed frames bolted to the floor with leather restraints attached. The walls were bare except for water stains and scratch marks. A separate room contained shelves of pharmaceutical bottles, many unlabeled or marked only with numbers and initials. Dr. Thornton, examining these medications, identified several powerful sedatives and experimental compounds, some imported from Europe and not approved for use in American medical practice. His report, filed with the court and later published in a medical journal, expressed grave concerns about the quantities administered and the apparent absence of protocols for monitoring patients' responses. Some of these preparations, he wrote, contain derivatives of laudanum and chloral hydrate in concentrations that exceed therapeutic thresholds by dangerous margins. Others appear to be experimental formulations whose effects on human neurophysiology are poorly understood. The combination of these substances with electrical stimulation, as suggested by equipment found on the premises, presents grave risks to mental faculties. Most disturbing was what the search party did not find: people. Not a single patient, staff member, or administrator remained on the premises. Personal belongings in patient rooms suggested hasty departures, drawers left partially open, clothing items abandoned, personal correspondence scattered. In Dr. Harllo's office, the filing cabinet stood empty, with ash residue in the fireplace indicating recent burning of documents. The mystery deepened when investigators discovered a hidden passage behind a bookcase in the doctor's private study, leading to a narrow staircase that descended below the basement level. This concealed area contained a laboratory equipped with advanced medical instruments, electrical devices of unknown purpose, and extensive notes written in a cipher that would take specialists months to partially decode. The laboratory space bore little resemblance to conventional medical facilities of the era. Alongside familiar equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, glass retorts for pharmaceutical preparation, stood apparatus of more questionable purpose. A chair fitted with restraints and electrical connections dominated one corner. Nearby cabinets contained dozens of handwritten journals, their pages filled with the same cipher found in loose notes scattered across the work surfaces. The deciphered fragments revealed something far more sinister than mere financial exploitation. Dr. Harllo had been conducting unauthorized experiments in what he termed permanent therapeutic tranquility, a process that involved progressive administration of drugs and electrical stimulation to specific areas of the brain, rendering patients docile and compliant while maintaining their ability to perform basic functions. His notes spoke of liberation from the tyranny of troublesome thoughts and the peace that comes with the silencing of internal dialogue. Patients were ranked according to their receptivity to treatment, with those showing the greatest response moved to the lower levels for more intensive intervention. The most successful cases were described as achieving a state of perfect compliance without resistance or memory of former distress. One particularly disturbing passage, decoded by a cryptographer from the Pinkerton Detective Agency, described the ideal outcome. Subject demonstrates complete nullification of autonomous will while retaining functionality. Responds to direct instruction without hesitation or consideration. Exhibits no spontaneous conversation, emotional display, or independent action. When not actively directed, remains in a state of passive observation, physically present, but mentally absent. The search for Dr. Harllo and his missing patients became one of the largest manhunts in Ozark history. Railway stations were monitored, telegrams dispatched to neighboring counties, and posses organized to search the surrounding wilderness. Advertisements appeared in newspapers across the region, seeking information about wagons or carriages that might have transported nearly 40 people from the isolated location. The logistics of such a movement seemed impossible. The narrow road leading to the Stillwater could accommodate carriages, but moving such a large group would require multiple vehicles and considerable time, increasing the likelihood of detection. Yet no local livery stable reported renting vehicles to the resort, and no teamsters acknowledged transporting passengers from the facility. It was as though the entire population of the Stillwater had simply vanished. The first break came 3 days after the discovery of the abandoned resort, when a local hunter reported finding an expensive leather suitcase partially submerged in a remote section of the river 10 miles downstream from the Stillwater. The waterlogged contents included personal papers identifying the owner as Dr. Mortimer Harllo, along with a journal written in the same cipher as the laboratory notes. More ominously, the suitcase contained several $1,000s in cash and negotiable bonds, not the possessions one would deliberately abandon. The condition of the suitcase and its placement suggested it had been lost accidentally rather than discarded intentionally. This discovery prompted a systematic search of the riverbanks and surrounding wilderness, utilizing tracking dogs and experienced woodsmen familiar with the terrain. The effort yielded no immediate results, but established a theory that would guide subsequent investigation. The doctor and his patients had attempted to flee through the wilderness rather than risking detection on public roads. On May 23rd, the mystery grew darker still when 2 bodies were discovered in a ravine near the Arkansas border. Both were male, identified by their clothing as Stillwater attendants. The coroner's examination indicated they had been deceased approximately 1 week, with cause of death determined to be gunshot wounds to the back of the head. No weapons were found at the scene, and the positioning suggested the bodies had been transported to the location after death. These grim discoveries intensified the search but yielded few additional clues. Witnesses in a small settlement 30 miles south reported seeing a group of well-dressed individuals boarding a private rail car in the pre-dawn hours several days earlier. The description matched some of the known Stillwater patients, but the witnesses noted their unusual behavior, moving in perfect unison, speaking only when directly addressed, and displaying no reaction when one of their party collapsed briefly on the platform before being assisted back to his feet. As weeks passed without further discoveries, theories proliferated. Some speculated that Dr. Harllo, alerted to the impending investigation, had liquidated his operation, silenced potential witnesses among his staff, and escaped with his wealthier patients to continue his work elsewhere. Others believed more sinister outcomes, suggesting that the doctor, rather than risk exposure of his experiments, had eliminated all evidence, including the human subjects. Local folklore embraced darker explanations still. Tales spread of secret caves beneath the still water where the doctor conducted experiments, or of patients transformed into mindless workers sold to mining operations across the border. Such rumors, while dismissed by authorities, reflected the profound unease the case had generated throughout the region. The case took an unexpected turn in July 1908, when a sanatorium in Colorado reported admitting a woman who matched Josephine Whitlock's description. The woman, who had been found wandering disoriented near a train station with no identification or memory of her arrival, spoke little, but occasionally mentioned a Stillwater and someone named Harllo. When Ambrose Whitlock traveled to Colorado to identify her, he confirmed it was indeed his sister, though profoundly changed. According to medical reports, Josephine exhibited symptoms consistent with what would now be recognized as dissociative amnesia induced by psychological trauma. She could perform basic functions, eating, dressing, following simple instructions, but displayed no recognition of her brother or recall of her life before the Stillwater. More disturbingly, she showed evidence of extensive pharmaceutical intervention, with blood tests revealing traces of several experimental compounds documented in Harllo's laboratory. Dr. Harold Merrick, the physician who treated Josephine at the Colorado Sanatorium, documented her condition in detailed case notes, later published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. "The patient presents with a most unusual form of amnesia," he wrote. "Unlike typical cases where memory loss centers around traumatic events or specific time periods, Miss Whitlock demonstrates selective absence of personal identity while retaining general knowledge. She can name common objects, understands social conventions, and performs complex tasks when instructed, yet appears to have no sense of personal preference, desire, or individual history." Most disturbing to her brother was Josephine's emotional flatness. Once described as vivacious and opinionated, she now displayed neither joy nor distress, regardless of circumstances. When shown family photographs, she studied them with mild curiosity, but no recognition. When told of her parents' passing years earlier, she acknowledged the information with the same placid acceptance she showed when offered a cup of tea. The only time she displayed anything resembling emotion was during a thunderstorm, when the sound of electrical discharges caused her to retreat to a corner, arms wrapped protectively around herself, murmuring repeatedly, "The silence comes after the lightning." Over the following months, 13 more former Stillwater patients were located in similar circumstances, abandoned at various medical facilities across 4 states, all suffering comparable symptoms. None could provide coherent accounts of what had transpired at the resort or how they had been transported to their discovered locations. Most exhibited the same eerie compliance that Sheriff Hadley had noted in Josephine Whitlock during his initial visit, responding to questions with vague pleasantries but showing no distress, curiosity, or desire for information about their situations. Dr. Montgomery Stapp, a neurologist who examined several of these recovered patients at a specialized facility in Baltimore, documented their condition as artificial placidity, a state characterized by complete absence of anxiety or distress, regardless of circumstances, coupled with extreme suggestibility and minimal self-initiated action. In a paper presented to the American Psychiatric Association in 1909, Dr. Stapp suggested these individuals had undergone profound alteration of the will through chemical and possibly electrical means, rendering them hollowed vessels that maintain human form while emptied of personal characteristics. Physical examinations revealed further disturbing evidence of Harllo's methods. Several patients exhibited small, symmetrical scars at the temples, consistent with repeated application of electrical contacts. Others showed signs of surgical intervention at the base of the skull, where the brainstem joins the spinal column, a location that, Dr. Stapp noted, controls fundamental aspects of consciousness and autonomic function. Laboratory analyses of blood revealed traces of compounds similar to those found in Harllo's abandoned laboratory, suggesting ongoing effects of chemical intervention. Most recovered patients demonstrated a peculiar relationship with language. They could speak when spoken to and followed direct instructions precisely, but rarely initiated conversation. When they did speak spontaneously, it was typically to request basic necessities, food, water, use of facilities, expressed in simple, direct phrasing devoid of personal preference. "May I have water?" rather than "I'm thirsty" or "I would like a drink." Equally striking was their behavior when left unattended. Rather than engaging in activities or exploration, most would simply sit motionless, gazing forward without apparent focus until someone directed them otherwise. Dr. Stapp described observing one former patient through a one-way mirror for over 4 hours, during which time the man remained seated in exactly the same position, barely blinking, until an attendant entered to guide him to the dining hall. The fate of the remaining patients, at least 20 individuals according to the resort's partial records, remains unknown. Equally mysterious is what happened to Dr. Harllo himself. Despite extensive investigation spanning several years, no definitive evidence of his whereabouts after abandoning the Stillwater was ever discovered. Unconfirmed sightings were reported as far away as San Francisco and New Orleans, and rumors persisted of a similar health resort, operating briefly in northern Mexico before disappearing just as investigators closed in. The financial aspects of the case proved equally elusive. While records indicated substantial sums had been transferred to various banking institutions under Harllo's control, these accounts had been methodically liquidated in the weeks preceding the abandonment of the Stillwater. The money trail eventually led to a private bank in Switzerland, where regulations protecting client confidentiality effectively terminated the investigation. Perhaps the most unsettling postscript to the Stillwater case emerged in 1916, when a respected physician in Vienna published a monograph on experimental treatments for psychiatric conditions. The work contained detailed procedures for inducing states of therapeutic dissociation through progressive administration of specific compounds, procedures strikingly similar to those described in Harllo's decoded notes. The author cited correspondence with an unnamed American colleague whose work had allegedly produced remarkable results. When questioned by authorities, the physician claimed the information had come through anonymous communications, the originals of which had unfortunately been destroyed during a laboratory fire. The Stillwater Health Resort itself remained abandoned for decades, the subject of local legends and occasional trespassing by thrill-seekers drawn by its macabre history. Tales circulated of strange phenomena experienced by those who ventured onto the grounds, unexplained drowsiness, temporary memory lapses, sensations of being watched by unseen observers. Whether these reports reflected psychological suggestion or something more tangible in the environment remained undetermined. In 1943, during a severe thunderstorm, lightning struck the main building, igniting a fire that consumed most of the structure. The stone foundation and portions of the brick facade survived, slowly reclaimed by the encroaching forest. Today, little remains visible except weathered stone steps leading nowhere, and occasional fragments of wall emerging from dense undergrowth, silent sentinels, guarding whatever secrets still lie buried beneath the forest floor. What truly happened within those walls in the spring of 1908? Why did Dr. Harllo abandon his operations so abruptly, leaving behind valuable equipment and research? What became of those patients never found. The official investigation concluded in 1910 with more questions than answers. The files were archived, the case officially closed, though unresolved. Some answers may lie in the testimony of Josephine Whitlock, who, after years of specialized treatment, gradually recovered fragments of memory. Though she never regained full recall of her time at the Stillwater, her therapist's notes, sealed until 1960 and discovered during a hospital archive digitization project in 2018, contained transcripts of sessions where she spoke of the silence room and the chair that takes away thoughts. He said it was a kindness, one transcript records her saying, that the world demanded too much of sensitive minds, that peace came from emptiness. In another session, she described a procedure, cold metal on my temples, a taste like copper in my mouth. Then nothing, beautiful nothing. But sometimes, in that nothing, I could still hear sounds, very far away. Perhaps most chilling was her description of the doctor himself. He watched us like we were specimens, not with cruelty, that would have been easier to understand. He observed with curiosity, like a man watching insects respond to stimuli. When the treatments worked well, he would smile and make notes. When they didn't. Here the transcript indicates a long pause. When they didn't, those patients went to the lower rooms and never returned to the upper floors. As her memory gradually reassembled, Josephine also recalled fragments of the evacuation, how patients were awakened in the middle of the night, instructed to dress and pack only essentials. The doctor seemed afraid, she recounted, not panicked but tense. He kept checking his watch, saying the timing had to be precise. The attendants moved us in groups of 4, down through the woods behind the building to where wagons waited by the river. We weren't supposed to speak. Those who asked questions were given injections that made them compliant. Her memories of the journey itself remained jumbled, impressions of movement through darkness, changing vehicles, long periods of waiting in empty buildings. I remember a train, she said, private compartments, the doctor moving among us, administering something from a silver case he carried. After that, less and less. Fragments of sky through windows, the sensation of being carried. Then Colorado, but how I arrived there, who brought me, I cannot recall. Sapabert, the fate of Dr. Mortimer Harllo has inspired countless theories over the decades. Some believe he perished during the hasty evacuation, perhaps killed by his own staff or by patients who momentarily broke free from their induced docility. Others suggest he simply adopted a new identity and continued his work elsewhere, possibly in Europe during the chaos preceding the First World War, where experimental medical practices flourished with minimal oversight. A tantalizing clue emerged in 1965 when a retired nurse from a private sanatorium in Switzerland contacted authorities regarding a patient who had died there in 1937. The man, admitted under the name Martin Gray, had claimed during moments of lucidity to have once operated a facility in America where he perfected the science of silence. The nurse had dismissed these as the ravings of delusion until years later, when she chanced upon an article about the Stillwater case. By then the patient had long been deceased, buried in an unmarked grave, and the sanatorium's records had been largely destroyed during renovations. Adding credence to this account was the nurse's description of the patient's personal effects, which included several notebooks filled with encrypted text similar to the cipher used in Harllo's journals. More compelling still was a photograph she had preserved, a faded image of an elderly man with patrician features and penetrating eyes that, when compared with known pictures of the younger Harllo, showed striking similarities despite the passage of years. If this man was indeed Harllo, he had lived out his final days in obscurity, his experiments apparently discontinued, but never renounced. According to the nurse's account, even in his decline, He maintained a peculiar affect, speaking precisely but without emotion, observing those around him with detached interest rather than human connection. He did not seem to experience illness as others do, she recalled. Even in considerable discomfort, he would describe his symptoms with clinical detachment, as though observing a subject rather than enduring the condition himself. The legacy of the Stillwater remains not just in the scattered ruins on a remote Ozark hilltop, but in the fundamental questions it raises about the nature of the human mind and the ethical boundaries of those who would seek to alter it. Dr. Harllo, in his decoded notes, repeatedly justified his work as merciful, freeing patients from the burden of troublesome thoughts, anxiety, and the pain of memory. What greater gift, Yunhe wrote, than to liberate consciousness from its own limitations, yet the testimonies of those who encountered his liberated patients tell a different story. Behind their placid expressions and empty compliance lay not peace, but absence, the silence not of tranquility, but of extinction. The fundamental qualities that made each person unique, their preferences, thoughts, and emotions, had been systematically altered, leaving behind only echoes of human beings. The case retains particular resonance in an age increasingly concerned with the manipulation of consciousness. Modern neuroscience has mapped brain functions with precision Harllo could only have dreamed of, while modern medicine has developed compounds that can alter mood, perception, and cognition with remarkable specificity. The ethical questions his crude experiments raised remain relevant in an era of increasingly sophisticated intervention in the mechanisms of mind. Dr. Cyrus Blackwood, a contemporary neuroscientist specializing in consciousness studies, reflected on the Stillwater case in a 2019 interview. What makes Harllo's work so disturbing, even by the standards of early 20th century psychiatry, was his apparent goal. He wasn't trying to treat specific symptoms or conditions. He was attempting to fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself, to remove agency while preserving function. In his own disturbed way, he was addressing one of humanity's oldest philosophical questions. Is awareness itself the source of suffering, and would its absence constitute peace? Visitors to the ruins of the Stillwater today, those few who can still locate the overgrown access road and are willing to make the difficult hike, often report an unusual quality to the silence that pervades the site. It is not merely the absence of sound, they say, but something deeper and more unsettling, a silence that seems to reach inside the mind itself, dampening thought and inducing an inexplicable lethargy. Many describe an overwhelming urge to lie down among the stone remnants and close their eyes, to surrender to the stillness. Park rangers and local authorities discourage such visits, citing safety concerns about the deteriorating structures. But some long-time residents suggest there may be other reasons for keeping people away from the site. They point to the unusual number of hikers who have become disoriented in the vicinity over the years, wandering for days before being found in a confused state, unable to account for their lost time. More troubling are the cases, documented in county medical records but rarely discussed publicly, of individuals who, after visiting the ruins, developed symptoms reminiscent of those displayed by Harllo's recovered patients, periods of unresponsiveness, unusual compliance, and fragmented memory. These episodes typically resolve within weeks, dismissed as reactions to exhaustion or dehydration. Yet the pattern persists, generation after generation, as though something of Harllo's science of silence lingers in the very soil and stone of the place. Hydrological studies conducted in the 1970s may offer a partial explanation. The limestone foundation of the region is riddled with underground streams and caverns, forming natural conduits for groundwater. The spring that once fed the Stillwater's therapeutic baths originates deep within the mountain, potentially passing through deposits of mineral compounds. Analysis of water samples from the vicinity revealed traces of lithium, bromide, and other substances known to affect neural function, not in concentrations typically considered dangerous, but perhaps sufficient to induce subtle effects in susceptible individuals. More intriguing is the possibility that Harllo selected the site precisely because of these properties. His journals make repeated reference to the unique chemical composition of the local waters and their synergistic effects when combined with electrical and pharmaceutical intervention. Perhaps what began as observation led to deliberate enhancement, the introduction of additional compounds into the groundwater system that might persist long after his departure. Environmental testing commissioned by state authorities in 1995, following several incidents involving disoriented hikers, detected no conclusive evidence of contamination, but noted anomalous soil composition in several areas surrounding the former resort. Particularly notable were elevated levels of certain metals associated with early electrical equipment, concentrated in a pattern suggesting deliberate distribution rather than accidental spillage. The investigation concluded that while these findings were of interest, they posed no immediate public health concern, and further study was not warranted given the site's remote location and minimal visitation. The Stillwater Health Resort that once promised rest delivered a silence far more profound and terrible than its patients ever anticipated. It stands as a dark chapter in the history of the Ozarks and a warning about the vulnerability of the human mind to those who would seek to reshape it, according to their vision of improvement. In the quiet depths of the forest, where the remnants of Harllo's ambition slowly crumble back into the earth, the silence continues to speak, if only we would listen carefully to what it tells us about ourselves, our fears, and the tenuous nature of our most precious possession, our own consciousness. Perhaps the most disquieting aspect of the Stillwater case is not what was discovered, but what remains unknown. Of the 42 patients documented in the fragments of records that survived, only 15 were ever accounted for. What became of the others? Did they, as some speculate, become unwitting subjects in continued experiments elsewhere? Were they, as darker theories suggest, simply lost when they no longer served their purpose? The questions raised by the Stillwater case extend beyond historical curiosity into contemporary ethical concerns. As our understanding of the brain advances and our ability to modify its function increases, the boundary between therapeutic intervention and fundamental alteration of personhood becomes increasingly relevant. Modern treatments offer genuine benefits for specific conditions, yet they involve modifying the physical basis of consciousness in ways that may affect the essence of self. The answers lie buried with the doctor himself, wherever his remains may rest. But his legacy continues in the questions his work forces us to confront about the nature of consciousness, the boundaries of medical ethics, and the terrible vulnerability of the human mind to those who would reshape it according to their vision of improvement. As the sun sets over the Ozark Hills, casting long shadows across the ruins of what once was the Stillwater Health Resort, one can almost imagine the echoes of those who passed through its doors, seeking healing, but found instead a silence from which many never returned. It is a silence that continues to resonate through time, a warning from history that some forms of peace come at too terrible a cost. The most profound horror, perhaps, lies not in the dramatic elements of the story, the abandoned resort, the missing patients, the mysterious doctor who vanished into history. Rather, it resides in the philosophical question at the core of Harllo's work. Is consciousness itself, with its attendant capacity for suffering, anxiety, and discontent, the fundamental human problem? And if so, would its removal, leaving behind a functional human form without the burden of self-awareness, represent the ultimate therapy or the ultimate violation? These questions have no easy answers, and perhaps that uncertainty itself constitutes the lasting legacy of the still water and its master. In seeking to create perfect peace through the science of silence, Dr. Harllo confronted us with the possibility that what makes us most human, our capacity for inner experience, with all its pain and wonder, may be precisely what we can least afford to lose. The ruins of the Stillwater Health Resort continue their slow return to the earth, gradually disappearing beneath the relentless growth of the forest. But the questions it raises, like the silence it once promised, remain, echoing still for those willing to listen.